You think you know what evil looks like. You think it carries a weapon, or wears a hard face, or hides in the dark waiting. But the most vile man these mountains ever produced did not hide and did not threaten. He came to your door when your child was burning with fever. He sat at your sickbed and held your hand. He was the most welcomed man in 3 counties, the one every family sent for in the worst hour of their lives. And for 30 years he used that welcome to do something so monstrous that, when the truth finally came out, the county did not write it down. They could not bear to. His name was Mordecai Dune. He was 58 years old when a grieving father finally understood what the healer had been taking from the dying. And this is the story they buried with him. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you are watching from tonight, and whether there is anyone you would trust with your life if you were sick and helpless. I ask because this is a story about that exact trust, and about a man who turned it into a feeding trough, and I think it will mean more to you if you hold someone's face in your mind while you listen. Tell me your location. By the time we are done, you may never look at a kind man's hands the same way again. The country was the high mountains of western North Carolina. In the years between roughly 1880 and 1910, a stretch of steep hollows and isolated farms strung through the Black Mountains, where the nearest trained physician might be 2 days hard travel away, when he could be reached at all. In that world, sickness was the great terror, because sickness in an isolated hollow had no remedy but luck and folk knowledge and prayer. There were no hospitals. There was no medicine as we would understand it. When a fever took hold, or a wound went bad, or a child began to fail, a family had almost nothing to put between their loved one and the grave. Almost nothing. What they had in those mountains was the healer. Mordecai Dune was what the old people called a yarb doctor, a root and herb man, a granny man though he was no granny, a folk healer of the kind every mountain region had. But Mordecai Dune was famous in a way most were not. He was said to be able to cure what no one else could. He had a reputation across 3 counties as the man to send for when everyone else had given up. When the regular healers had shaken their heads and the family had begun to grieve, people said Mordecai Dune could pull a soul back from the edge. They told stories of children blue and still who breathed again after he sat with them, of grown men with festering wounds who rose and walked. And so when the worst came, families did not send for the distant doctor. They sent for Dune. They sent a rider out over the ridges to fetch him. And they thanked God when he came. He was a striking man to look at, which mattered. He was tall and very lean, with a long pale face and a close gray beard, and his hands, the hands that did his work, were extraordinary, long-fingered and very clean, unusually clean for a mountain man. The nails always pared, the skin always pale, as though he never did the rough labor that ruined every other set of hands in the county. His eyes were a flat, colorless gray, the gray of fog with no sun behind it, and his voice was low and gentle and endlessly patient. He did not marry. He lived alone in a cabin set far up a hollow that no road reached, and he asked little payment for his work, a side of meat, a measure of corn, sometimes nothing at all. This generosity was much remarked upon, the way folks always praise a man's open hand without asking what closes it. For years, decades, nothing seemed wrong. Mordecai Dune was a blessing, a fixture, a name spoken with gratitude at 1,000 hearths. If some of his patients died despite his care, well, he was sent for only in the worst cases, the cases no one could have saved, and the wonder was not that some died but that so many lived. If there was a pattern in who lived and who died under his hands, no one in those scattered hollows had the means to see it, because no one kept the kind of records that would let a person stand back and look at 30 years of Mordecai Dune's work all at once. No one, that is, except Mordecai Dune himself, who kept very careful records indeed, though no one knew it yet. The first crack appeared in the spring of 1908. and it appeared in the grief of a man named Tobias Wren. Tobias Wren was a farmer in the Cane River country whose wife Sari had taken a fever after the birth of their fifth child. They had sent for Mordecai Dune, as everyone did, and the healer had come and sat with Sari Wren for 3 days and nights, and on the third night she had died, gently in her sleep, with the healer at her side. This was a tragedy, but not, on its face, a strange one. Women died in childbed and after it, all the time. Tobias Wren grieved and buried his wife, and would have gone on grieving in the ordinary way except for one thing that he could not stop turning over in his mind, a detail he later gave in a statement to the county that survives in fragments. In the last hours, half mad with grief and exhaustion, Tobias had stepped out of the sick room for air, and coming back he had paused in the dark doorway, and he had seen the healer leaning very close over his dying wife's face, closer than seemed needful, and he had heard the healer murmuring something low and steady, not a prayer he recognized, and he had seen, or thought he had seen, Sari Wren's chest rise in one last long breath and the healer draw that breath in, deliberately, the way a man draws on a pipe, his pale, clean hands cupped almost tenderly around her face. And then she was gone, and the healer had straightened and turned to him with that gentle, sorrowful look, and Tobias had told himself he had imagined it. That is the first sign. A grieving man who saw something at the edge of the lamplight and could not make himself unsee it. Nobody thought too much of it, least of all Tobias Wren at first. Grief makes men see things. Healers lean close to the dying. It meant nothing. But Tobias Wren was a careful, stubborn man, and the image would not leave him, and over that summer he began, quietly, to ask. He asked the families up and down 3 counties who had sent for Mordecai Dune in their worst hour, and he asked them not whether the healer had saved their loved one, but, specifically, what the healer had done in the final hours of the ones who died. And the answers he gathered began to form a shape that turned his stomach to ice. Family after family, asked to remember closely, recalled the same thing. When a patient was going to recover, Mordecai Dune was bracing and brisk and kept his distance, gave his herbs, checked the patient from across the room, and left them to mend. But when a patient was going to die, and the families swore the healer always seemed to know, hours before anyone else could tell, which way it would go, he changed. He sent the family from the room to rest. He sat very close. He cupped the dying face in his pale, clean hands. And several people, pressed hard by Tobias Wren's questions, admitted that they too had seen, through a door or a window, the healer leaning down to draw the last breath of the dying into himself, slow and deliberate, with an expression that one woman described, and never forgot, as the look of a starving man at a table, and then Tobias Wren found the deaths. This is the second escalation, and it is the one that moves the story from a grieving man's suspicion to something undeniable. Tobias Wren, with the help of a literate cousin, began to count. He counted across the 3 counties the patients Mordecai Dune had attended in their final hours over 30 years, the ones who had died with the healer alone beside them. He could not get them all. The records of those hollows were thin and scattered. But he got enough, and the number he got was past 60, past 70, past 80, climbing toward 100 souls who had drawn their last breath in the cupped pale hands of Mordecai Dune. Each death, alone, was explainable. He was sent for the dying die. But laid side by side, year upon year, hollow upon hollow, the count became a thing no explanation could hold, and Tobias Wren understood that he was not looking at a healer's failures, he was looking at a harvest. What Tobias Wren did next was the bravest and most foolish thing of his life. He went up the hollow to Mordecai Dune's cabin, the cabin no road reached, alone, to face the man. He told a cousin where he was going and said that if he was not back in 2 days, the cousin should bring others. He was not back in 2 days. When the cousin and 3 other men went up the hollow, they found Tobias Wren alive but out of his mind, sitting on the floor of the healer's cabin, and they found Mordecai Dune gone, and they found the thing in the back room that the county would refuse to write down. The cabin's back room was windowless and lined, floor to ceiling, with shelves, and on the shelves were jars. Hundreds of jars sealed with wax, each one labeled in the healer's small, careful hand with a name and a date, and the names were the names of the dead, the patients who had died in his hands across 30 years, and the dates were the dates of their deaths. The jars appeared empty. They held nothing a person could see. But the men who opened them, and only a few were opened before the rest were left alone forever, said that when the wax seal was broken there came out of each jar a breath, a single long exhalation of cold air, faintly sweet, that fogged in the warm room though the room was not cold, and that some of the men swore they heard, in that breath, the faintest sound of a voice, and that one of them recognized in the cold, sweet air the very smell of his own dead mother's sick room, dead 12 years, attended in her final hour by Mordecai Dune. They sealed the jars back up. They could not do otherwise. They did not know what they were holding, only that the healer had spent 30 years gathering it, jar by jar, breath by breath, name by name, from the dying who trusted him most. And among the jars, Tobias Wren had found something else before his mind broke, and he had it clutched in his hand when they came for him. It was the healer's record book. In it, in that same small, careful hand, Mordecai Dune had written out his understanding of his own work, and the county officials who later read it, the ones who decided to write none of it down, described it as the most chilling document any of them had ever encountered. The healer did not believe he was murdering anyone. The book is clear on this. He believed he was a kind of gardener of souls. He believed that the last breath of a dying person held the whole of what they had been, the soul itself caught in the moment of release, and that this was the most precious and concentrated thing in all the world, and that ordinary people simply wasted it, let it escape into the air and be lost, when it could be gathered and kept. He believed his long, unnatural life, for there were people in those mountains who swore Mordecai Dune had looked exactly the same for 50 years, that he had attended their grandparents' deaths and looked no older now than he had then, was sustained by what he gathered. He fed on the dying, not on their blood, not on their flesh. On the last breath, on the soul at the moment of its leaving, drawn into his pale, clean, cupped hands while the family rested in the next room, he had made himself the most beloved man in 3 counties precisely so that he would always, always be there at the moment of death, welcomed and trusted and alone with the dying, free to take the one thing he wanted. Mordecai Dune was never found. He had walked out of his hollow the same day Tobias Wren walked into it, and he was never seen in those 3 counties again. And there is no record of his death anywhere, which is the detail that troubles people most, because if the man in his book was telling the truth about what sustained him, then there is no reason to think he ever did die at all. The county officials sealed the cabin. They did not write the case into any history. Tobias Wren never recovered his full mind and lived out his years cared for by his children, and the only thing he would say of it, over and over, was that the healer's hands had been so very clean, and that he understood now why, because hands that only ever did that one gentle, terrible work would never need to be anything but clean. Today there is nothing left of Mordecai Dune's cabin but a square of foundation stones far up a hollow that still has no road. The shelves are long collapsed, the jars long broken, whatever was in them long since let out into the mountain air. The local people of that county, the old ones, still have a saying that strangers find merely quaint. When someone is very ill, they say, "Do not let them die with a stranger holding their face." Stay close. Hold them yourself. Let no one take the last breath but the air. Most who say it have no idea why. A few do, and those few will tell you that there are still healers who travel the high hollows. Kind men with clean hands and gentle voices and colorless eyes who arrive in your worst hour and ask little payment, and that the wise family thanks them and feeds them and never, ever leaves them alone with the dying. So what was Mordecai Dune? Was he a clever, monstrous murderer? A man who used the desperate trust of the sick to murder 100 people across 30 years for reasons we cannot fathom, and whose jars held nothing but a madman's delusion and a grieving man's broken imagination? Or was the thing in his book true, that the last breath is the soul, that it can be taken, and that there walked among those trusting mountain families for 30 years a creature that wore a healer's kindness like a coat and fed on the precise moment when the people who loved him most were too grief-stricken to watch? Was he a man who told himself a monstrous lie? Or a monster who finally wrote the truth down? The county would not decide. They would not even write the question. After they opened those first few jars and felt the cold, sweet breath come out and heard what some of them swore they heard, they decided that some healers are too vile for the history books, and that the kindest thing they could do for the dead was to seal them back up and let the mountain keep them. This is one of the most monstrous cases these mountains have ever hidden, and somewhere up an unroaded hollow the foundation stones are still there, and somewhere, if the book told the truth, the healer with the clean, pale hands may still be walking, still beloved, still arriving in someone's worst hour. So tell me where you stand. Do you believe Mordecai Dune was a human murderer hiding behind a folk healer's reputation, and his jars held only delusion? Or do you believe he was something that fed on the dying, and may never have died at all? And would you, in your worst hour, have left him alone with someone you loved? Tell me below. If this story chilled you to the bone, and you want to dive deeper into the trusted, welcomed monsters these mountains produced and then refused to record, then stay with me and subscribe, because the most dangerous evil never came at us with a weapon. It came holding our hand. Until next time, when the worst comes, stay close to the ones you love, and let no one take the last breath but the air.